Hello there guys, what is going on? SonOfChelsea back here again for another video, but also our first podcast on the 90-minute podcast network. As I said, I announced that the other day. This is the first podcast and it feels quite fitting because it's a massive game on Sunday at Stamford Bridge, Chelsea versus Arsenal. My team selector is already on the channel, so you can see my thoughts about Chelsea's lineup and a tactical battle, but we've got a collab today, an Arsenal point of view. I'm very glad to say one of 90 Min's own, Harry Symeou, who runs the Chronicles of Gooner Podcast and YouTube channel, is with me today. Harry, how you doing, mate?
Good, mate. It's an absolute pleasure to be here, although I'd be lying if I said I wasn't a little bit nervous going into the weekend.
Really? Even though Arsenal have won the last 2 times at Stamford Bridge?
Yeah, there's still a part of me that doesn't want to get carried away with Arsenal. There's still a part of me that feels like, we're obviously going for a really good period at the moment, but it could come crashing down. It's not something that we're guaranteed to sustain. And so when these games come up away against, rivals of the traditional Big Six, you do worry a little bit about how that game's going to go. There's, obviously there's some confidence and belief, and more belief than there would have been 2-3 years ago. And as you say, Arsenal did win at Stamford Bridge last season. And actually, if you were to ask me which team was better, that one or this one, I'd say this one. So in theory, I should be confident, but the fan in me feels a little bit nervous, I have to say.
Yeah, even rolling back to like the Mourinho years, when Chelsea were kind of the more dominant team. And I remember 14-15, I remember Chelsea being quite heavy favourites, but still a lot of nerves before that game, so these games always bring that out in you. I think it's interesting because obviously, even being a Chelsea fan, watching sort of your channel in recent years and sort of seeing how you've covered the Mikel Arteta reign. I know you've gone through certain cycles with him as a coach, and given Chelsea, I think have been through 3 head coaches during the time he's been at Arsenal, which kind of speaks to the culture of both clubs. It's interesting now because it all feels so perfect and rosy with Mikel Arteta. Everything's coming up right for him. The team's bonding, it's gelling, the fans are behind him. The Emirates feels like a very positive place. But do you think that kind of discards the down moments that were really there for Arteta during his first couple of years as head coach?
I think I'd be lying, Dan, if I told you that I didn't have a couple of wobbles. There were a couple of points where I really questioned whether we were moving in the right direction. I questioned whether Mikel Arteta was the right man to take this club forward. And I struggled at the beginning to see what the vision was in some cases. There were some parts of it that you could clearly see. For example, that he wanted to tighten up the defence, that there was an idea of building a new group, a young group, that the first port of call was to clear the decks of players that were just not good enough and obviously were causing problems behind the scenes. That bit was always clear. But we've gone through different phases under Mikel Arteta. So there was a point at the beginning where we played with a back 3, back 5, whatever you want to call it. You saw that in the FA Cup when we played Chelsea, of course, in the final. And obviously Arsenal won it with AUBAMEYANG shining that day. There were periods where we wondered if we were going to play a 4-3-3, if we were going to play a midfield with 2 defensive players and one with a more advanced role and a bit more license. And so the team's definitely been through an evolution. But for the last year and a half, 2 years probably, it may be longer, I felt really good about where we're going because I can see the progression. I can see the signs. My last wobble was against Villarreal the season before last, when Arsenal were beaten in the Europa League semi-final by Unai Emery's side. That day was really difficult. Not because it was Unai Emery. I know a lot of fans will feel that way, but for me it was because you just couldn't make sense of some of the big calls that Mikel Arteta made. I remember at the time we didn't have a left back fit, and he opted to take Granit Xhaka out of the midfield, who was our only real competent midfielder available that day, and put him in at left back. And that made us weak, not just in one position, but in 2 positions. And, I thought he got his game plan wrong away at Villarreal. He played with no striker. He played with Emile Smith-Rowe in a false 9 position. And you came away from that tie just thinking, well, where are we going? What are we doing? Does he have the minerals to do this? Is he cut out for a job of this level? But to be fair to him, there were signs throughout all of last season and probably half of the season prior. And the signs at the start of this season are incredibly encouraging. And you've got to be happy with what we're seeing at the moment.
It is a nice story in the sense of a coach winning over players at times, because, particularly that period, I think it was at the start of the 2020-21 season when he really struggled. He was close to the relegation zone, if I remember rightly. And I just wonder from your perspective, because we see it so often now in football, and I do personally feel, and I'm not just saying this as a Chelsea fan, I think a majority of clubs may have cut ties with Arteta at that point. I think a lot would, given how bad things were. Maybe it helped him there was no crowd inside at the time. But do you think him winning battles with players like Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang, filling out those players who hadn't really improved the team? I think Ozil left whilst he was there. Others too, maybe hang-ons from the end of the Wenger era. Is that the key thing that has kind of given him so much weight and power and patience during this process, which I know is a cliche word with Arteta, but I think it's the best way to describe it?
I wouldn't say it's been the fallings out with players. I think the fact that he's come through those difficult moments of having to manage those big characters and manage their situations has proven to us that the club are in this for the long haul. The way that they backed him in his handling of Mesut Ozil, for example, told us that Mikel Arteta was valued more than Mesut Ozil. The way that he dealt with Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang and the fact that the club supported that told us that he was valued more than Aubameyang. So I think what kind of happened was a lot of Arsenal fans just accepted that this guy is going to be our manager. And then when the results started to come and the performances started to improve, and even if there was still inconsistency, you could at least see where we were going and where we were trying to go. Then you started to see, okay, well, I might as well get behind this. I might as well support this. I mean, I've got friends that were so anti-Mikel Arteta that they look ridiculous now. They turn up at the Emirates Stadium on a Sunday and they're singing, "We've got Super Mick Arteta," and they're jumping up and down and they're talking to me about Arsenal going on and winning the league. It's nuts. It's nuts to think that, he was in that position with some people and now he's loved and adored by everyone. But perhaps more so than the results, which is obviously the first thing that you look at. The attitude of the players, the culture around the club, the vibe inside the stadium is just so different. You'll see it on Sunday. The travelling support, they're always brilliant, but you'll really feel it on Sunday because, everybody's behind the team. Everybody feels like Arsenal are not back, but are on their way to something closer to what we became accustomed to for all those years. I mean, I was at Arsenal last night against FC Zurich, and I was talking to someone from the club in the press room before the game, and he was telling me he can't remember the demand for tickets being the way it is now since we moved to Emirates Stadium. You're talking a Europa League group game, and you're talking about, everybody wanting tickets and people trying to get hold of tickets frantically. It's gone nuts, and in a good way. So I think all of that helps when the results do take the dips here and there. But I don't know, I'm really enjoying watching my team again. And I lost that during Unai Emery's tenure. So to have it back and to see the progress is obviously very positive.
Would you say it's even more positive than those last Wenger years? Because even though there were some high points under him, there was still, that sort of divide around him that kind of dragged the club down at times, didn't it?
Yeah, it's the excitement around the future. Like with Arsene Wenger, we won those FA Cups towards the back end of his time, which was obviously a great achievement. But you always knew that was kind of the ceiling. You never felt that under that current model, under that existing regime, that we could push higher and further on than that. Whereas under Arteta, although we haven't done it yet, and there's a long way to go, and you'll know from conversations we've had, I'm not one of those people saying we're going to win the league, but there is that what if, there is that excitement, there is that feeling that we haven't seen the best of this yet. And that optimism, it goes a long way, and it buys you time as a manager. And and that connection between the fans and the club and now the manager as well is really strong.
Moving on to the pitch, and then obviously the game between Chelsea and Arsenal. I think it's kind of foreshadowing the season. I was in Orlando to watch the Chelsea-Arsenal game. Not a great night, and it was kind of also foreshadowed the end of Thomas Tuchel at the club. But I was really impressed that night with how sharp Arsenal looked, given it was a pre-season game, and particularly off the ball, I felt that they looked good. Tactically, I think two players that stand out for me is obviously Gabriel Jesus. He's been an incredible signing so far. But also Granit Xhaka is one player that has really gone from a bit of a scapegoat to kind of a beloved figure. I mean, if there's any more players you want to pick out, let me know. But those two particularly for me stand out as ones that have really helped take the team to another level.
For sure. Granit Xhaka has been consistent for a while now. And Arsenal people, sections of the fan base have refused to give him credit because of what happened before, because of that incident against Crystal Palace. There are some people that just can't get over it. They can't drop it. And even now, you get the feeling that they're waiting for him to make a mistake so that they can, wheel that old argument out again and say that he disrespected the club and all of that. What I would say to those people that say that he disrespected the club, yeah, he didn't act in the best possible way, but they disrespected him. You don't boo our player. And, maybe people outside of Arsenal circles don't know that actually that booing that Granit Xhaka suffered that day against Crystal Palace for walking off the pitch too slow, which isn't really an issue, is it? Like, it isn't something worthy of booing. That booing issue had gone on for about 3-4 games prior to that. I remember being at Sheffield United the week before, and he was booed, and there was ironic jeers when he was substituted in a game that we lost. And so that was just an explosion of emotion. But I mean, the mental strength he's shown to get past that and now be playing probably the best football of his career is incredible. But you also have to give Mikel Arteta a lot of credit here, because he convinced him to stay. He, has pushed him forward as one of his leaders. He is the vice captain of Arsenal right now, although that's unofficial, but he is the one that takes the armband when Odegaard's not around. And I think Arteta's clever there, because he knows that if he says it, if he names him as a captain, that whole narrative comes up again. It's kind of like a underhanded way of doing it. But he's been incredible. He's scoring goals this season. He's getting forward. And what Arteta has done is identified what Xhaka's qualities are: his technical ability, his battling qualities, the fact that he never gives up, great spirit, good leader. But defensively, there were question marks. And what he's done is taken him out of that position, pushed him into a more advanced role. Now he's getting forward and showing his technical ability, what he can do. But he's also got that awareness to be able to drop in alongside Thomas Partey when we need to defend. And Arsenal have the perfect balance in midfield now, I would say. So, yeah, he's been a revelation. And Gabby Jesus has just been, what a signing. I mean, absolute steal in terms of what he cost on today's market. He's not scored a goal for a few weeks, and that's been a big talking point among the Arsenal fan base. But do you know what? I'm not worried, because he's still contributing so much. He's still producing assists left, right and centre. I think he's got 6 assists in the Premier League so far. He's already scored more goals in the Premier League than Lacazette did all of last season anyway. So that's already an instant improvement. But it's the energy levels he brings. It's the leadership he brings. And it's the know-how he brings. This is not a kid coming through. This is someone who's been there and done it. And I think we're starting to see a nice balance between those experienced players who can really kind of shoulder the responsibility, and the young players who, of course, are on their way up and are doing really well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think tactically, when Chelsea were looking at certain targets over the summer, Jesus was one I was kind of a little bit excited about with us being linked to him, because tactically he fits into a team that wants possession. He presses well off the ball, and he looks like he's really taken the mantle of having more responsibility at Arsenal in his stride, and obviously he's going to be a threat for Chelsea. I find it interesting, an opposition point of view on Chelsea, because it's hard enough for people watching Graham Potter so far to predict who's going to be in the starting lineup, what the formation's going to be, and obviously Chelsea being quite erratic. I mean, you said a little bit of nerves about just generally a game at Stamford Bridge, and I understand that. Is there Chelsea players in particular you're looking at and going, that's one area where I'm a little bit concerned Chelsea could exploit, if there's an area in the Arsenal team that you're kind of a little bit fearful of at the moment?
I wouldn't say there's a specific area, just because I feel like most of Arsenal's best 11 is going to be available. And so there's not an area that I look at and I go, oh my God, what are we going to do here? Or I don't pinpoint one specific area. But I know that if we're not at our best, then Chelsea have all of the tools to punish us. I'm obviously fearful of Aubameyang, because he'll feel like he's got a point to prove, particularly when it comes to Mikel Arteta after the way that was all played out and the way that was handled. But I guess for me, the scars that I have, and I guess I don't want to go back too far, but the scar I have from this season is that game at Old Trafford, where we went there and, Man United fans, even I'm sure will admit they were absolutely played off the park, yet they caught us in the transition on a couple of occasions and managed to win the game. That scares me. The fact that Arsenal are very confident at the moment, and I believe will go to Stamford Bridge and try and impose their game. That means playing a high line. It means trying to squeeze and push Chelsea back. But it's what that leaves him behind. And you know that even if you get caught once against a side of Chelsea's quality, it can be defining. You play against weaker opposition and you kind of take that risk that when they do get in behind and they do break, that they're not always going to have the quality to take advantage. But against sides like Chelsea, it only takes one moment. So I am worried that we might be a little bit naive, and that might be born out of an overconfidence because of where Arsenal are at today. But at the same time, I don't think we're equipped to come there and sit back. So it's a difficult one. And yeah, it's such a tough game to call that naturally I'm nervous. I mean, when it comes to Chelsea under Graham Potter, I don't really know what to make of them so far. I've said on numerous occasions on the 90 Min show that I think he's a good appointment. I like him. I think he will do well. But I don't want to call it an issue, but what I'm seeing at the moment is what's his best team? What's his best system? How is he going to shape this team moving forward? I know he's had some injuries to contend with, and that can throw plans out the window. But I think he hasn't got too much time, given the standards at Chelsea and what's expected, to be playing experiments. He kind of needs to decide on something and go with it. And so it's difficult probably for Arsenal to prepare as well, because you don't know what Graham Potter's going to put out. You know how Arsenal are going to play. You know who's going to play. You could probably tell me the whole 11. But I don't know what Chelsea are going to bring to the table.
Yeah, absolutely. It could be a three at the back. It could be we played 4-3-3 against Zagreb, so we could see that again. Just one final thing, Harry. I mean, about the season, obviously it started so well. I do wonder if the World Cup break is coming at a bad time for Arsenal, because the momentum has been so good. Maybe that's the case for a majority of teams, to be honest, and we don't know what the league's going to look like post-Christmas. But just your sort of ambitions and hopes for the season. I mean, I don't really do predictions on games on this channel. But in terms of just, the game on Sunday and the rest of the season, how are you sort of feeling about it?
So in terms of the season in general, for me, it's still about getting in the Champions League. I know people say I'm playing it down, I'm keeping calm. I am keeping calm. For me, it's about getting in the Champions League. But if we scraped it, I'd be disappointed. Not disappointed, because obviously that's what we want, but there'd be a bit of me that was underwhelmed because of where we are right now. You're right, the break doesn't come at a great time, I don't think, for Arsenal. And there's always that fear of what if you lose key players at a tournament that has nothing to do with you. That would be a manager's worst nightmare. So I'm worried about that. In terms of the game on Sunday, I think it could go either way. I know that's a bit of a cliche, but I really do. I think if Arsenal are at it, they can cause Chelsea problems. But likewise, we've seen Arsenal not be able to maintain their level of performance in both halves in recent weeks. And that worries me as well, going to a place like Stamford Bridge. Got away with it at Leeds. Okay, at Southampton, we drew the game, but we didn't get beat. And we were really bad in that second half. Stamford Bridge, you won't get away with that. So, I'm nervous about the game. I'm concerned. I think it can go either way. So how can I possibly feel comfortable? But in terms of where Arsenal are at, for me, it's still about Champions League qualification.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Harry. As I do with all my guests, I give them a chance to shout out where people can find their work online.
Yeah, check me out on the Chronicles of a Gooner podcast. It's on YouTube. It's on the 90 Min Podcast Network as well, like yours. And tune in, have a listen if you're interested.
Perfect. Hopefully reflecting on a Chelsea defeat. And I will be on Harry's show actually right after recording this. So you guys now can go and listen to that as well. Thank you guys for watching. If you are watching on the YouTube channel, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you don't miss any of the uploads. If you are listening on the podcast, make sure to give us a rate and review. Really does help out. And as I say, more coming up on the podcast in the coming weeks as well. Follow me on Twitter at SonOfChelsea, and I will see you again very soon. All the best.